Wow, this is a lot of people crammed in here. Is everyone doing all right? Fantastic. So excited to see some familiar faces from last year when I had the opportunity to speak for the Ojai group. I think they took quite a big chance on bringing in this crazy woo-woo doc into their environment, and I think it went well. The folks that were there last year, what do you guys think? Well, okay, it's good to see some familiar faces. But I'm very happy to be here tonight, and we are going to cover some juicy hot topics in the world of naturopathic oncology, integrative oncology in general. But before we do, I'm going to put you guys in the hot seat for just a moment. I would like to see a show of hands of who in this room has worked with an integrative oncologist, be it a naturopathic integrative oncologist or a conventionally trained integrative oncologist. Awesome, that's a pretty good chunk of you. So makes me happy to see that this isn't completely a foreign topic. How many of you are personally just interested, whether this is for yourself or a loved one, to learn more about, obviously you're here tonight, but really wanting to take the next step to actually dive in deeper to an integrative oncology approach? Good, that makes me, I was going to say, if this isn't your room for you, we've got some other plans here. But I'm very happy to have everyone here because some of the things we're talking about tonight are, they may be new for some of you, but at the same token, they're things that have been around, most of them, for a very long time. So you might be surprised when we get to some of the nuts and bolts of this. So my goal is to dive right into some of these new innovative concepts and approaches to your overall integrative healthcare plan when it comes to an oncology journey, and just kind of gloss over all of them so you know what else is out there available to you above and beyond surgery, chemo, radiation, hormonal blockade therapies, or targeted therapies. So I want you to know there's a lot more that you can add into or do instead of or in addition to what you're already doing. So tonight it's not going to be about me giving you the exact specifics because that isn't how this works. We don't practice protocols. We don't have an algorithmic approach. Every single patient is different. And so if you are interested in any of these concepts, I'm going to invite you to remember some of those folks that stood up today, to ask them some more questions and help plug you into places where you can learn more about these. So after that ridiculously amazing introduction by Renee, it's a little bit embarrassing, but I love what I do. And my own journey brought me here. It'll be 25 years, October 21st, that I was diagnosed with a stage 4 terminal diagnosis of cancer and told there was nothing to do. Even with conventional medicine, I would be lucky to have 3 months. I was very, very, very sick and very hopeless. And I am here 25 years later, instilling hope. Hopefully instilling hope in some of you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's a big year, so I get excited about this. So that being said, I'm going to dive in because I wanted to share that little bit of my history so that you know I've been on this journey with many of you. And it's kind of a weird club, but we're part of it. And we might as well make up the rules as we go along. So a new cancer conversation is brewing. I think Renee mentioned that we're coming to a time where I've been doing this to some degree for 25 years, and the things I've seen change in the last 2 years, and my colleagues will probably say the same, it's exploded of the knowledge we have now about what cancer may actually be about. I think we're still beginning to scratch the surface, but I think the conversation is changing. So we're in the era of the ohm. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, that's things like the microbiome, the epigenome, the estrobolome. We're now understanding that we have even like an estrogen little universe inside of us. And one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is the endocannabidiome. Say that fast 10 times. We're actually finding that it's also its own little entity within us. We're also moving into the era of immunotherapies. How many of you heard about the Napster guy who just donated $250 million of his own money into immunotherapies, but he had one caveat. You, of the 8 people he donated, or the 8 industries he donated this to, you have to talk to each other. You have to share your data. That right there is innovative. Can you believe that that's taken us 70 years or so to get to that point? But here we are. That's also what's happening in the world of the shoot the moon Biden precision medicine movement, where they're basically saying enough of with this hoarding of your information. We've got to share this. We have to do something differently. Instead of all of us behaving like the blind group of people holding on to a piece of the elephant, we're all finally taking our eye masks off and looking at it together. It's pretty awesome. So I think we're going to see some big changes pretty quickly. So I get excited about that. I hope you do as well. This is kind of that bad news. I'm one of those folks who, I'm a realist. I'll tell you the bad news first, but I never tell you the bad news unless I'm going to follow it up with some good news. So some of these things we're going to dive into initially. You might kind of get a little weak in the knees, but hold tight. It gets better, I promise. But basically, we're getting ready to overtake cardiovascular disease in the next couple of years with cancer as the leading cause of death in the world. That's not good, okay? That's something new. And those were statistics mentioned by 2007. We're quickly arriving. We're probably going to beat that statistic by a year. They're expecting us to actually hit it closer to 2019. And the rates of cancer are expected to double in general by 2030. 1 in 2 men will have cancer in their lifetime. 1 in 2.4 women, I don't quite know how we dissect you out that way, but 1 in 2.4 women born after 1960, I want you to pay attention to that date, it's significant, will have cancer in their lifetime. It makes me happy when I hear people grumble, because I grumble a lot when I see things like this, in that it's a bit shocking. How many of you, does that kind of hit you in the gut a little bit? When you see something like that, where does your mind go immediately when you look at a date like what's changed since 1960?
Chemicals.
Yeah, a lot of things have chemical. I mean, there's so much we've done differently. And then we've unfortunately not made any real changes in survival since the 1950s. And the few changes we have made were in basic things like understanding about cigarette smoking and lowering that. There was a big dip at a window of time after the NHANES study came out and everyone got scared and jumped off their hormone replacement therapy. But we quickly put it back on track again. We put everybody on the bioidentical forms. So we didn't hold on to that little victory for very long. So the old concept of cancer was this kind of genetic hiccup, and that everything had a genetic origin. I mean, even when I was in medical school, I don't know when you guys went, but it was a long time ago for me, 1996. The concept was a two-hit theory. Do you remember that? Anyone who's taken your oncology? And it was about your genes kind of being weakened, and then some big assault comes to the genes, and there you have a cancering process that gets going. We haven't necessarily thrown that concept out entirely, but we've understood that it's a lot more complicated than that. So we are moving into the era of the metabolic theory of cancer. Are any of you in this room familiar with Thomas Seyfried's work out of Boston? A couple hands there? Good, one. Okay. So this man, amazing oncology researcher who wrote a book a few years ago. I remember when it came out, it was just like, oh, it was a big deal. They wanted to hang him in the streets. But it's called the metabolic cancer, a metabolic process. That was in essence the whole approach of his book, is saying we've got to talk about this conversation in a very different way. And he basically brought to light a conversation that started back in the 1920s. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later when we talk about the ketogenic diet. But basically what we're now understanding is that cancers come and go in all of us on an average of 7 times in our lifetime. There are some cancers that very specifically regress on their own with no intervention at all, such as cervical cancer, kidney cancer. Okay, so we see that a lot in practice. And then established cancers can remain dormant. And so that means that you don't have to necessarily eradicate every cell or every tumor or every lesion in your body to be considered, cancer-free. Because I'll tell you this, no one in this room, whether you have cancer now or did or have never had cancer, none of us are cancer-free. We have an average of 75 million cancer cells at any given time. But thanks to the wonders of our terrain and the communication that our body has with our terrain, we keep those in check, okay? So it's always really frustrating to me when I see people going after the tumor to the fault of taking out the whole entire body with it. It's like, okay, maybe we can look at this differently. So I'll share a little snippet of my own personal story. I still, 25 years later, have lesions on my liver, have the tumor on my right ovary, and have a pelvis filled with peritoneal carcinomatosis. I'm not cancering. Okay, let that sink in for just a moment, right? I did not do surgery. I did not do chemo, I did not do radiation. But I've spent 25 years understanding exactly why my body got to that point and what it takes to keep it in a chronic maintenance disease state, just like any other chronic illness. That doesn't mean that you should go out and do the same thing. That was my journey. That's why I don't share my story very often, because it's a full-time job. Okay? So I love hearing a few of you say that. It's like, ugh, this is not easy. But I much prefer that to death. So, you know, I'm going with that. And then changing the train, that's exactly what I've spent 25 years doing. And I stumbled and had to figure out so much. I wish I'd had me 25 years ago. This would have been a lot easier. But I've learned a lot over this time. And many of you in this room have taught me. Many of you in this room have been my teacher and taught me how to continue to go deeper with this. And we now know, and what we're going to spend the night talking about, is how we can actually manipulate our microenvironment, manipulate our terrain to change the expression of cancer in our bodies, now or in the future. So a couple little things here. These are known as the hallmarks of cancer that we're going to just quickly rush over. I don't want you to get caught up in the specifics, but this is from our conventional kind of medical textbooks on oncology, that we started out knowing that there are 6 major characteristics of a cancer cell. What I want you to notice is the first 5, so I'll kind of scooch out here. The self-sufficiency and growth signals, evasion of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, limitless replication material, you know, and angiogenesis, which means new blood vessel growth to a tumor. Those things are actually happening all the time in our healthy cells, right? And we're calling those the hallmark of a cancer cell. So what starts to change the personality, if you will, is when we get into the tissue invasion and the metastasis. That's when the communication system goes wonky in the system and it needs more intervention. All right? Ironically, this is also the section, and even my conventional colleagues would agree, that this is the hardest part to treat, when it starts to break out of its cage and run amok. That's where we start to get issues, and that's where Western medicine has some of its limitations. We can go after it very aggressively, but we sometimes take the person out with that. So how can we still work on the metastasis piece while still supporting the whole body? Now, just a couple years ago, 2011, I believe, we added 4 more components. This will show you after we were at this for 50 years of the first 6 hallmarks of cancer, and then lo and behold, a few years ago, we said, oh, we should probably add these extra 4, right? And this is the place where the conversation is starting to get interesting, frankly. Deregulated metabolism, evading of the immune system, so sort of cloaking the self and hiding. Those cancer cells are little buggers. Like I just imagine them with like Groucho Marx glasses and they're running around a room there. Unstable DNA. I heard someone a moment ago talk about chemicals. It's kind of like we're a big unstable DNA soup these days. And inflammation, big. We used to die of infection 100 years ago. Now we die of inflammation. So kind of a big interesting thing. Now the way we've historically addressed cancer was frankly a cause of concern. And we saw this as a tumor, as a thing. I mean, how many of you, and I can tell you 100% of my patients have said this, but how many of you actually thought you were healthy before the day you were diagnosed with cancer? Put your hands down right now, because that was absolutely not true. That was impossible to be true. I will tell you this, if I took a lab on every single person in this room, I could probably figure out your triggers as to what's going on for you right now, whether that means you're preempting a cancer process or something else. It is very hard to be healthy on an unhealthy planet these days. Okay, so we've all that concept of putting a frog in boiling water, but you actually put it in the cold water and you heat it slowly, and then you don't really realize that you're dead now, that you're the frog in total boiled water. That's what's happening to all of us. So I'm having people step up to the plate a little bit and get a little more proactive to look under the hood before you're a building engulfed in flames. Before you get to say, I was healthy until I woke up this morning with a tumor the size of a basketball in my belly. It doesn't happen that way. And so the way we've approached, I mean, heck, we even have things called tumor boards, right? How many of you have been talked about to Eddie Tumor Board? Wouldn't it be cool if they had a terrain board or a person board? That is my biggest, even my naturopathic colleagues in medical school, we had terrain boards. That almost gave me cancer again, just having that conversation, because that's so, we're still in that rut of seeing it as a thing that's somehow separate of us. And so while we can go ahead and cytotoxic, reduce the tumor bulk, which can be very, very powerful and very important, we have not at all changed the terrain that created that tumor to begin with. And the disturbing part, and again, I don't think there's even a single conventional oncologist I've worked with over the years would disagree, but what we've understood is even those treatments can provoke more, basically the more aggressive you treat a tumor, the more aggressive you can create multiple drug resistance or radical aggressive recurrence that's harder to get a handle on. So again, there's so many ways we can be much more elegant about the way we approach this, and we should be. And then again, this is a process, it's not an event, and it's different in every one of us. So if I was sitting here tonight talking to a room full of people with lymphoma, and they're all the exact same B-cell lymphoma, I guarantee if we went around the room, you would all have very different stories. You would all have very different chemistries, and yet every one of you will be treated basically with CHOP or CHOP-R, right? Which is the kind of the chemo cocktail they give to this. Doesn't matter how or why. And yet, did anybody even look to see if you had a recent exposure to formaldehyde? Or that you've got Epstein-Barr virus raging in your tissues unbeknownst to you? Or that you've been on an estrogen bender for some time from well-meaning doctors trying to help your symptoms? Or other components that could have been triggering you into that cancering process? No one's ever asked that, as far as I know. So quick blip here. When I was first diagnosed, October 1991, we started with the Office of Alternative Medicine as a little offshoot of the NIH, and I think they thought, how cute, so sweet, and it kind of sent us on our way. In my second year of medical school, it was renamed to NCCAM, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. Got a bigger name, but even probably a smaller office. They probably moved them into a broom closet at that time. In 2015, in December, we've now changed the name again. It's being rebranded, and they're letting go of the word alternative altogether. To me, that is a sign of change. That's a sign of times. Because alternative somehow sounds funky, right? Alternative. So now we're complementary and integrated. The KIM, the CIM. I think that's a big step right there. So the conversations are changing. It's like molasses, how slow we're moving, but it is happening. And so obviously when we're thinking of complementary integrative medicine, it's taking that whole person approach, which is, again, let's get away from the tumor boards and get to the terrain boards. Integrative oncology itself, this is actually the KIM, the complementary integrative medicine definition, is an evolving evidence-based specialty that uses complementary therapies in concert with medical treatment to enhance its efficacy, improve symptom control, alleviate patient distress, and reduce suffering. Well, that's reasonable, right? Why is that not everywhere? Offered everywhere. It is here at Ojai, in Ojai Cares. You guys offer a lot of these options of support. And then Dr. Abrams, who's been one of my mentors as well, I like how he talks about this sort of rational use of things that go beyond even the evidence-based medicine, because sometimes the evidence is empirical and things we've watched for thousands of years. And only now someone decides, hey, let's throw a little bit of money at see how acupuncture affects pain. Okay, they've been doing it for 3,000 years, but just saying. Yeah, it's always a big deal there. So attacking the tumor isn't enough. It is no longer enough. And this is where I do get a little bit passionate and a little bit on my soapbox. And I'm always pushed back, like I've made some promises that I won't get too aggressive out there. But please know that just because your oncologist is coming after the tumor does not mean that you have to be complacent to that only. This is you stepping in for your own support. And you may have to get out of the box of your conventional approach to go beyond the tumor itself. If you want the best outcome, that's absolutely necessary. And I don't think that anybody would disagree with me out there to gotta take a bigger picture. So using whatever tools are necessary to bring you and your terrain back to balance with whatever modalities you choose. And this is just a simple commentary of how we are blending them, taking the best of both worlds, our kind of conventional oncology, both sides of our brain, using the left, the masculine, the linear, the logical, diet is just based on calories in. Oh my gosh, please fire people who tell you that. Or find someone who can tell you something different. The skepticism of the role of the immune system, despite the fact that we're moving into the world of immunotherapies, there are still a lot of our colleagues out there who say, bah humbug. So, that's changing. And then the way we even do our studies, it's impossible to remove these variables. It's impossible to get a very pure data set. Drives me crazy. So, and I love to dig through and dissect out the research. So, and their goal is, as it should be, it's a destruction of the tumor, but notice it's very tumor-centric. When we bring in the KIM, the complementary integrative oncology, we bring in a model that supports the whole organism. And it's more of the balance, the yin to the yang, the masculine to the feminine. It individualizes the care. It goes a bit deeper and asks the questions, how did I get here? Just like you heard Renee share in her own journey. I mean, part of her asking that question is what inevitably led her to me in my podunk little clinic in Durango, Colorado. And now she's back out there educating others on this approach. And it's not an either or. That's what I want to be very clear tonight. It's a very solid and, like a kumbaya. And in the political state of the world right now, it's easy to segregate and push ourselves separate of one another. And I would liken that concept that what's happening in the world today is a cancer. All right? And so when I'm working with people on integrative oncology, I'm thinking about the ecology and the politics and the connections we have to others on the planet as well. Because how we reflect the outside is what's reflecting on the inside. And so think about that in your process when you're working on your healing journey of maybe some places where you feel disconnect or fear in other parts of your life to dig a little bit deeper. So how many of you in this room have read Radical Remission? Oh, that's good. How many of you in this room have never heard of this book? Okay, now you're gonna all run out and get it tonight. You're gonna love it. So Dr. Kelly Turner, who's now become a personal friend as well, we're getting ready to do some cool work together in the future, but she was a sociologist on a cancer center, and she started hearing stories about people having spontaneous remissions. So she went to her doctors and like, what's this all about? And the doctor's like, oh, silly, that was a misdiagnosis, or some other kind of flippant excuse. But at first she kind of poo-pooed it, but then she kept hearing more and more of these stories. So this woman set out on a 10-year non-paid study on 1,500 people that she collected data on, including their supported documents of their labs and their CT scans and whatnot of people who spontaneously went into remission. And for her, it wasn't so much about, wow, they would spontaneously went into remission. For her, it was, why? How? What were they doing different than other people who were sent home to die? And she found these 9 lifestyle factors that were kind of common themes for everybody. And that's what the book will go into, and I briefly talk about it here in just a moment. Please.
And Ojai Cares has a book study. We're doing the video, we're doing the workbooks.
Awesome.
So
So this is also on taping. Ojai is doing a study of the radical remission approach, and you can be part of this conversation. Also, her website now has over 15,000 documented spontaneous remission cases, and she's always taking more. Okay, so that to me also triggers a sign of hope and communication. Like all those spontaneous remission people are coming out of the closet. So and I'm one of them, right? So I'm on her website, or will be, actually we're getting it on there right now. So just some things to think about. And so this is a naturopathic kind of concept of our lifestyle or dietary factors that affect our health and well-being, the essential determinants. It's part of our naturopathic philosophy. But basically, if you can't have access, and I'm talking about breathing fresh air as I'm seriously allergic to wood smoke, so this has been a tough, I sound like I've been smoking Marlboro cigarettes all day, but this is tough. Like this is not easy on some of our systems. I live in Durango, Colorado, where many of you probably saw that the river that runs through my town was mustard orange last summer. The color of your shirt back there, it's perfect. And so we have to be very careful. We have to work much harder. I mean, I've always been careful, but just an example for how well I live. Even though I was careful with my water, I steam shower every day and forgot. And I blew out my thyroid gland. I went to 12.4 out of nowhere. I'm like, something's weird here. Ran my lab, sure enough, arsenic, lead, cadmium, iron, copper, off the charts. That scared me, because those are things I know in the naturopathic community that are very big drivers of proliferation and recurrence. So I'm like, bah. So it's been a tough journey back because of all my years of having scans. I blew out my kidneys. So every time I tried a heavy metal detox now, I pretty much shut my kidneys down. So it's been a fun few months. I'm learning, very humbled by the experience. But basically these essential determinants are critical. So if you're missing anything in this, even one item on this list of those determinants of health, you could be missing the boat on how you're going to clean up your body, like what could have gotten you sick to begin with. Tomorrow we're going to go into this in more detail for those of you who are joining in. So I'm going to flesh this out quite a bit deeper. And the 6 phases of cancer treatment, we want to, and this is at an integrative component with your conventional and your naturopathic oncology approach, we want to build a healthy lifestyle and diet. We want to maximize tumor cytoreduction. So that's where you can bring in the best of Western medicine as well. We want to lower inflammation and angiogenesis, the blood vasculature we were talking about. We want to build and repair the immune system. We want that immune system to go back to what it's supposed to do. The 3 R's: recognize, respond, and remember. And if you're missing any one of those 3 R's anywhere along the way, that's where cancer can kind of get squirrely and put on its Groucho Marx glasses again and hide from you. And then the angiogenesis, we want to lower this as well. And so that's where we go into this. Dun, dun, dun. So I just want to go through, first of all, how many of you in this room are familiar with mistletoe therapy? Okay, not many. How many of you in this room are using or have used mistletoe therapy? Okay, even less. So we've got a few people who know about it and a few that are using it. This is exciting. And we have a doctor here. Are you using it too? Yes. Okay, good. So I'm so excited. So you guys will want to talk to Heidi and Dr. Mel and Dr. Heidi tonight to find out their approach with this. How many of you in this room are familiar with IV vitamin C? Okay, a little bit more. That's kind of to be expected. Great. How many of you in this room have used that? Okay. So it's kind of interesting. Like some of you know, and about half of you have actually used it. How about cannabis? Now I am in Ojai, California, so I would at least expect that you guys know what this means. But how many of you are familiar with cannabis medicine? I love that, makes me really happy. Okay, I live in Colorado, so we're like, nah, it's one on every corner. Okay, and how many of you have used it medicinally, not recreationally? Okay, cool. And see, that's right now something big, and that we're kind of coming out of the closet in that work as well. How about the ketogenic diet? How many of you are familiar with the ketogenic diet? Oh, I'm happy to see that. That's more than I expected, actually. How many of you have implemented it, even in it for a short period of time? Cool, okay. And then hyperthermia, heat therapy. Yeah, would you like to stand up on that one there, Kristen? She's like the pro of hyperthermia if you want to talk to her after. So good, not very many. And then how many of you have used it? I'm like, okay. So these are the therapies that are really kind of up and coming in ways that can really enhance your experience on the cancer journey, really change your outcome. And all of these that we're going to talk about tonight directly impact those 10 hallmarks of the cancer cell that I briefly skimmed over. Pretty exciting. So I actually first met Dr. Mel in Germany 2 years ago. My husband and I did a lecture on our approach with mistletoe therapy and epigenetic counseling. I think most of the people in the audience looked like they were sitting behind a 747 jet as we talked like auctioneers up in front of a group for 15 minutes. But what was exciting is this room was about 150 doctors from 17 countries presenting data on this that we later found out is we've been using this continuously since the 1920s. There are over 7,000 studies 80 to 85% of all German cancer patients utilize this at some point in their therapy, and 60 to 65% of all European patients, my sister-in-law included, in France, use this somewhere along the way in their therapy. And yet in the US, we hear this. There's just no data. There's just no studies. This is totally bunk. I'm like, where is your head? It's clearly so far up your butt. You know. But it's amazing to me. So even I went there a little skeptical and sat there rather humbled to see what they're up to. Now, I'm breaking this down, and we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty. I'm exposing you to concepts tonight so you can get excited about one or two or all of them and go on a little, treasure hunt for this. But basically, it's how many of you know what mistletoe is in nature besides standing under it and making out at Christmas time? Cool. So you can identify it in some trees. So from the apple to the fir, pine, oak, ash are the most common trees where we see mistletoe grow. And it's considered kind of a semi-parasitic plant. And if you see it in a tree, it's interesting because what does it look like? A tumor. Yeah, so the concept of the law of signatures, which is also a very old concept in medicine, is that you kind of go, wow, that looks like a tumor, so therefore it might treat a tumor. And that was how it was figured out in the mid-1900s or early 1900s, that it was this concept of the law of signatures that then someone else had a really cool idea of, hey, let's ferment this stuff and inject it. I have no idea where they made that leap. Probably cannabis was involved, but they did. And so it's pretty exciting to see that this medicine has now gained quite popularity around the world. And the brands that we can easily access in the United States are the Helixor, Iscador, and Adnova, but there are over 36 different mistletoe companies in Europe. It's silly. It's like, again, we're being very limited here. Now this website up here, the PAAM.net, is an entire website about anthroposophical medicine and doctors who practice anthroposophical medicine all throughout the world. And you might find a few in your own backyard if you want to learn a little bit more. Mistletoe mechanism of action. Holy cow. It's incredible what this bugger does. So there are these lectins, and lectins are now hot topics in the world of immunotherapy and how we're going to approach the immune system. But basically, we've always used mistletoe historically as more of an adjuvant, as a side support, as kind of the backup singers for any cancer therapy. And it's done a beautiful job. People always, for my colleagues, everyone feels better on it, right? For the quality of life, and at first I was like, placebo, but who cares? If it is placebo is good medicine, right? That's another one that's like, well, then use it. But basically, people will qualitatively tell me that they feel much better when they take this medicine. And it's typically done subcutaneously, very superficially, that we teach the patient how to use this and inject it 3 times a week, or in many situations intravenously, which has been utilized. There's actually about 150 studies on its use IV in Europe, and there's just a handful of clinics in this country who are doing it intravenously, but hopefully we'll talk about that at the end here. That's getting ready to change drastically in the next year. So it has naturally anti-angiogenic properties. It stabilizes DNA. So for instance, in Germany, if you get a dose of Cipro, which please, for the love of God, do not take Cipro. If you want to learn more about Cipro, just go read in all the class action lawsuit websites that are out there on it, okay? You'll learn an earful. But if you happen to need a round of Cipro, I would go and do a round of IV mistletoe or subcutaneous mistletoe to clean up your DNA damage. If you've gone through a round of radiation, that's what they do in Europe, is they clean up the mess with this beautiful therapy. Very easy. Anti-inflammatory, it helps with inhibiting metastasis and platelet aggregation, the clumpy, sticky blood that we tend towards. It immunomodulates. Holy cow, we're spending billions of dollars on targeted immunotherapies that, unless your immune system is working, will kill you, okay? I got so excited when the immunotherapies hit the market, but then when I started seeing the reactions of most of the folks I was working with, even a study came out in the last week or two that said, oops, by the way, it was specific to lung cancer, but I'll tell you, I've seen it in every cancer. If you have an autoimmune disease, this is probably not a good idea. Now, how many of you who've ever been with or worked with a cancer patient, if you don't have an autoimmune condition before you get cancer, you will after you're done with the treatment? So the way we're doing it again in this culture is we're doing an on or off switch. We need a dial. Okay, we need like a volume up, volume down. There are these beautiful ways that we can actually use things like a PD-1 inhibitor elegantly without killing your patient or you by working on immunomodulating them, balancing the teeter-totter of their immune system, making it stable, so when you bring in that targeted therapy, it will not backfire horrifically. Which is, and if you've ever worked with someone who's had the backfire horrific experience on some of these drugs, as I have, it makes cancer, dying of cancer, look a lot more fun. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It's very unpleasant to go into massive autoimmune nephritis or hepatitis. Yes, sir?
What are the side effects of mistletoe?
Side effects of mistletoe. A little bit of, well, we shoot for a little bit of fever. That's actually what we want. We'd like to get your fever up a degree or two. You might feel a little bit achy, fluey because of the fever, which is a cytokine response. And you should have kind of a local response. If you're doing this subcutaneous, it should look belly or thigh. It should look like about the size of a quarter, of a little red dot. For some people, less than that. It might be itchy. It might be a little bit raised. It might get kind of knotted.
They're minor.
Oh, God.
They're minor.
Yeah. The mistletoe mechanism of action that I want you to have here, again, you can get these slides from me, is the biggest piece I think it offers is this immunomodulation piece that we're really missing the boat on in the way we approach the immune system, or even pretended it didn't exist before. So quite helpful. And then again, I've given you some websites of some PubMed. I mean, there are, even in this country, you see loads of research documented here, so you can go back and take a look at that yourself. With the mistletoe, why I'm kind of going through all of these rather rapidly initially is so we can tie it up for the specific question, so it's easy for me to get off track. So thanks for bringing me back. But we'll come back here in a moment. High dose IV vitamin C. Weirdly, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. I decided for some reason at 16 years old to become a vegetarian, which meant for me at that time iceberg lettuce and Velveeta cheese, because that was all we had. And the only place I could get a vegetarian meal in all of Wichita was this weird place that was made of pyramids. My mom forbade me to go there, but every Friday I went to this place. And every Friday this man sat down and ate with me, and he would talk to me, you know, just chat with me. And he was just like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I want to be a doctor. And he's like, no, you don't. And he was a doctor. I didn't know this. Later, I'd find out that this guy was Hugh Reardon of the Reardon Center, right? Oh man, it was like in my blood. I was literally born into this field to some degree. One of my colleagues when I was in naturopathic school, he said, aren't you from Kansas? Did you know this guy? I'm like, oh yeah, Hugh, no big deal. And this ended up being my colleague, Dan Rubin, who's one of the best known naturopathic oncologist in the world, ended up going and doing an internship. He was the first naturopathic doctor to do an internship with Hugh Reardon before he passed. And so kind of an irony, I had no idea what I was being exposed to, but it goes way back. And he picked up on the work of basically Linus Pauling. Okay, and unfortunately this work kind of got suppressed by the National Center, or National Cancer Institute, because they were trying to compare the results of the Reardon Center and of Pauling's work with that of oral dosing. And you literally, I mean, how many of you tried to take large doses of vitamin C orally, right? We would not be sitting here in this room together right now. Okay, for those of you who don't know, TMI, it makes for liquid yellow stools, so pretty abruptly. And you don't really want that happening because it's a water slide, it just pours through you. But when you can get it through the vein, you can get it up to crazy high doses. I mean, we might be able to get up to about, I've practiced, just because that's the weirdo that I am, I've gotten up to 24 grams orally. Oh, and that took some time to get up there. And it doesn't feel good. For any of you who've done it, it's not pleasant. But you can get up much higher, up to 100 grams. A couple of colleagues might have gone higher than that, but we found now we know we don't have to go that high for the IV to get the effect. But interestingly enough, still studies are coming out with, or still oncologists are saying you can't use vitamin C with your therapy because it's antioxidant. Okay, when you're doing IV high doses, it's oxidant. It's pro-oxidant. It's a cancer-killing agent. It's cytotoxic. And And when you do the lower doses, there could be some discussions around that, but really the studies kind of come back around and again saying, yeah, it's really not that big of a deal. There's a few studies out there. I am not the person to be like, read this study. That's not the way I do it. I do it through, I read it, I apply it in real life, I see what happens to myself first, to my patients, and then I share it with others. But basically, we kind of got away from it. It lost favor. And however, about, I don't know, are we talking 10, 15 years ago maybe, Jeannie Driscoll at KU Med started doing research, started on an ovarian cancer trial. It has now been in now they've tried it by itself with ovarian cancer in comparison with Gemzar. Gemzar 2 IVC, putting them together. Then they branched into glioblastoma and pancreatic cancer. And they're just like, this is kind of cool. There's a lot of good stuff happening here, but it hasn't branched out into mainstream yet. But it's probably, I don't know, wouldn't you say it's probably the most utilized alternative, I should say integrative complementary therapy utilized in oncology in this country today? Even conventional oncologists, naturopathic oncologists, nurse practitioners feel pretty comfortable implementing this treatment. And the side effects can feel kind of fluey as well. And the biggest thing I always tell folks is please don't let your doctor check your blood sugar and then treat it on this, because the vitamin C looks a lot like glucose and your body kind of gets momentarily fooled, but it is not a true glucose spike. That's the only time I've ever seen problems with use of high-dose vitamin C is when someone's like, oh my God, your blood sugar is 465, let's give you a dose of insulin. That's a quick way to kill someone. And so it's just this weird thing. We still don't quite understand the mechanism of action, and yet we know it comes down on its own within a few hours. So just to know that, even if you're diabetic or even insulin-dependent diabetic, we know this to be the case, and you need to work with someone who's accustomed with this. I am personally a fan, which you'll see on this page coming up here, of using kind of the Reardon protocol, kind of tried and true protocols. I have colleagues who are willing to deviate and add and take away from a lot of things, but I'm a little bit of a purist on that one because it works well and I can follow the data and I can show people how to use this. Let me make sure. I think I went back. Did it just, there it goes. So do I have it? Okay, so some of the mechanisms of action, it is something that we do not produce naturally in our body. And we all are eating diets today that basically put us into scurvy. All right, so a lot of you remember vitamin C and the stories of the sailors coming across, with no fruits and vegetables accessible, no perishable foods on their boats, all ending up with scurvy, their teeth falling out of their head, easy bruising. That's, so now what's ironic is that there's a lot of people out there in the world of vitamin C who think that cancer is sort of like the ultimate scurvy. And whether it was induced by some nutritional deficiencies or some other things that might have blocked our vitamin C uptake, or if we have certain cofactor issues in our body. Either way, it seems that people's quality of life significantly improves with the use of high-dose vitamin C. So I've seen ascites dry up, I've seen extreme pain go away within the treatment of IVC. I've seen cachexia, we've been able to slow down and reverse cachexia. Just people's quality of life, energy. A lot of my patients call it their orange juice IV and their energy IV. Please don't drink that orange juice. But these are the types of things that we started realizing, wow, it has a lot of mechanisms of action, both IV and oral. And it's just so much about wound healing. A lot of you are kind of familiar with vitamin C in general for that. But did you realize that the sort of most up-to-date concept or theory or philosophy of cancer is that it's a wound healing process gone amok? So it makes sense, even just intuitively, just like looking at the tumor in the tree for the mistletoe, that a wound healing process gone amok might respond favorably to vitamin C. Just saying. And then these are some of the concepts of the very specific Western medical. I'm not going to get into what HIF1 is or mTOR, but basically these are what the geeky scientists like myself and my colleagues like to look at to understand that this is where we're also spending millions and billions of dollars of money on research for mTOR inhibitors and HIF1 alpha inhibitors and all these different components that we're working on a regular basis, right? We have therapies that already exist working on these as targets and not single targets. These are multi-target agents that we're talking about tonight. Again, giving you some links if you want to go dig a little bit deeper here. But the one thing that it really potentiates, it supports your conventional therapy. It's not an antagonist to it. It doesn't dispel it. You might be careful around how you use it with radiation, but otherwise, it's a really well-tolerated, utilized therapy. And it does not have, when doctors say, well, it can impact your drug response, it shouldn't, because it doesn't work on the same enzyme pathways that those drugs work on. So that's just sort of a myth, if you will. These are some of the you actually can go on and get the Reardon protocol right off, take it to your doctor who does IVs and say, would you order these materials and do this for me? And then they have loads of very specific support and material to do this. So it's not like you're guessing in the dark. And then Dr. Neil Reardon, the son of Hugh, has a website that has all the current clinical trials that are going on right now. And we have a colleague right now, Dr. Heather Wright, who's a naturopathic FABNO up in Pennsylvania. She works currently at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America there, but she's been getting these therapies into hospitals. And she's got more trials going on with this. So, talk about the tides changing. So cannabis, near and dear to clearly so many people in this room. That was good to see. What I want to speak about is, first of all, this plant, we have it well documented for at least the past 3,000 years. There's some literature that talks about its use for over 10,000 years. But this is a plant. And the coolest thing about this plant is it seems that our bodies have a system that this plant likes to work with. So we have like our own little lock and key system, this endocannabinoid system, which is a modulator and influences all kinds of other activities in our body. Okay, this is pretty exciting. So we have two main, again, we are now starting to really study in a year from now. CBD medicine, cannabis research a year ago was following, 5 years. We are now putting the money into studying these things. But the funny thing is it's been here all along. We're just now looking a little bit deeper at it, right? So the CB1 receptor sites are mostly in your central nervous system. And the CB2 receptor sites are mostly in your immune system. And those guys we've only really learned about in the last decade or two. And the endocannabinoid system itself are these kind of groups of special lipids and receptors and enzymes that interact and degrade, when you take that medicine in, it utilizes it in different ways. And then in the 1840s, this Dr. O'Shaughnessy is who brought it kind of to our Western awareness because he saw amazing things happening with it when he was working with the British East Indies Company. But in the United States, Harry Anslinger was the guy who basically said this, which makes me laugh. Have you ever been around a bunch of stoned people? That marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. And that's when we pulled it from our pharmacopoeia. It was in the few original Merck manuals. I had the original Merck manual. It's all over the place. I have homeopathic cannabis, indica, and sativa from the 1700s, right after, like early stages of this. But basically, it was scheduled as a Schedule 1 in 1970. And said that it has, this is basically saying it's just a drug, it has no medicinal value whatsoever. And we've then just suppressed it and stop it, like pushing it down despite it kind of going, I'm here, and we're like, just shut up, get away. So that's the place where now we have this understanding that we have kind of buried this amazing medicine for the last 45 years. But basically it has over 100, we have over 100 different cannabinoids that we've identified. And in the plant itself, there's over 400 different constituents. And it's like, God, we've been hiding this for a long time. So the CB1 receptors are found everywhere in the body, like I said, but they're mostly in the brain, just like the CB2 are found like in your macrophages, your spleen, natural killer cells, playing a vital role in immune function. And cannabinoid receptors are found in all animals. That's what's so cool. So I have a 14-and-a-half-year-old dog who has a tumor the size of a grapefruit after our lovely river experience. My other dog died right away from a blood clot because we went to the river every day. But her tumor was the size of a grapefruit, and after 30 days on 300 milligrams a day of cannabinoid, just CBD, rope not dope, her tumor is the size of a doorknob. Like you can put your hand around it now. 30 days. That is not placebo. Okay, unless she's figured out some way to figure that out for herself. But she's kind of smart and that could happen. But these are the things we're starting to learn and understand about this medicine. It's antiemetic, it's appetite stimulating. We've known these things for a while because we started using Marinol in the 1980s, which is the pharmaceutical grade of pure THC. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work well. And there's a handful of patients that I've had say, it helped a little, but the majority of them said, but if my uncle, my Uncle Joey in his basement brought me home some good stuff that he had, that seemed to work really well. So when we would take it and break it down at its single component, it was not nearly as effective as it was when we get it into its whole plant constituent, or at least combinations of some of the constituents in there to get the more rounded out effect. So I wanted to give you guys a few sites here because it's extraordinary, and where we're going with this research in the next few years is we're off the charts. My husband now does medical testing on this to actually find constituents in this and help test this out. This is kind of the work they're moving into. But this article here by Dr. Abrams is one of the best articles I've ever read on medical marijuana. If you want to get a really comprehensive background on this, Jonathan Treasure has a new book that just came out. He's a famous herbalist in our world who wrote a great book on cannabis and cancer. It's quite wonderful. And these are two very specific websites that go into more the endocannabinoid system. So you guys start to realize, holy cow, we were kind of made to use these medicines in a very profound way. And yet we've been suppressing its use for some time or abusing it for some time because we've really hybridized it since the 60s into a very THC-rich plant. And it's not supposed to be that way. And when you get super overzealous on THC, which goes after the CB1, we talked about the brain, when you overactivate the CB1, you then break down the blood-brain and gut barrier, and you push autoimmunity, and you kind of dismantle the whole nervous system. So I've watched people in the industry, in the Colorado industry of cultivating this and using it excessively, testing it on themselves excessively. We've got a lot of new cases of ALS in young people. I'm like, man. But the other side of it is the CBD, which is the non-stony part, okay? The rope, not dope. And that's the part that goes after the immune system and makes massive changes there, massively anti-inflammatory, immunomodulating. And if you put a little bit, as it used to be, kind of, of a little bit of THC with that CBD, you get the best of both worlds. And that's the place where we're learning how, and we're starting to figure out now that you can take someone's epigenetics and actually know exactly what strain and what ratio. So we are getting totally geeked out on how we can use this as extremely targeted medicine depending on somebody's situation and condition. So big stuff happening there. Kind of segues into the ketogenic diet here, which is again another metabolic theory. And as we talked about early on, when I mentioned Dr. Seyfried and the metabolic cause of cancer, he's revisiting more suppressed data from the 1920s of Otto Warburg. And in the simplicity of this, he basically said that the way we were using energy in our cells gets inefficient at a certain level of time. And the body then moves quickly into kind of its fermentation state. And then that's where rapid proliferation of cancer cells happen. I am really making this quite basic here, okay? But it's important to kind of get a sense that he just made some observations about what was happening at that time. But a little bit into his work, that's where Watson and Crick got really groovy and found the DNA helix, and we kind of said, oh, forget about metabolic processes, let's focus entirely on DNA. And that's where we spent until basically the Genome Project fizzled and died in the mid, like 2006 era. We went, oops, that was kind of a bad road to take. They put it down. And so Seyfried and a lot of his colleagues have picked it back up and started running with it. And they've been fought hard on this. I've seen the damage. I see the heart and soul these guys put into it to say, we got to do something different. These are the most brilliant minds we have out there, but they're trying to turn around a boat in a harbor that went down DNAville and has been hard to turn around despite the evidence growing against it. But basically, what the ketogenic diet is working on the most is the mitochondria, which is all about what Warburg was getting to in the 20s. And so that is where the energy generating cell of our body gets broken, gets diminished, gets kind of rewired, and the energy production gets inefficient. And I'm going to simplify it. I'm not going to go into like the Krebs cycle and the electron transport and all of that component, because you could read on that. And actually some of these articles I'm giving you go into the details. But ultimately, let's break it down to this. It takes, when you go through the whole chain, you make 36 ATPs with carbohydrates. You make 48 ATPs with fat. Which would you choose? Just intuitively. Okay? And if you've gone into this state of broken down mitochondria that's kind of wheezing and gasping for air, what would you choose?
More.
And more what? Right. And so what have we been telling ourselves and the world around us since, what, Eisenhower? Yeah. Ugh. So, yeah. So that's where what the ketogenic diet is kind of most, what we're now coming up to more and more and more is like, holy cow, talk about changing the hallmarks of cancer in a profound way. Quite exciting. And I love this concept. One of my patients says this all the time, keep calm and keto on. They actually made buttons at a ketogenic conference we went to and worked with all these science geeks, all these doctors out there like, we need to come up with a pill because there's no way we're going to get our patients to eat this way. So they're, of course, spending billions of dollars on research to come up with keto esters. And I've got 8 women with ovarian cancer. They're like, we've been eating this way for a while, and we were told we would be dead like years ago. And so they brought buttons that said keep calm and keto on, and it was hilarious. But they became like the rock stars of this group because the doctors, like, they want to like touch them, like, you did this diet? That's amazing. And so the thing of it is it's really not hard. I mean, how hard is it to just, I mean, most people go, I can eat how much fat? It's a little overwhelming. So if you just naturally go to a diet of like 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrate a day, which, by the way, in my cancer patients, we're pushing them under 20, okay? But if you just naturally cut back to 50 and 60 a day, you're kind of naturally going to go into ketosis on your own. It's a natural part of it. This is like our feast or famine evolutionary process. We did not have a 7-Eleven on every corner, a couple hundred years ago. It just didn't exist. We are the most overfed and undernourished group of people the planet has ever seen. And it is destroying us terribly. It's destroying our DNA. It's like all the diseases we're dying from now, we used to call them inflammatory diseases. We're now calling them mitochondrial diseases. Okay? That's a big deal. And so what's interesting is just hold your seats for just a second. Does anybody have a guess of the average amount of grams of carbohydrate a day that an average American diet takes in? Anyone? 250? Anyone else? 450 grams a day. And most of that's at breakfast. For your healthy, low-fat yogurt, oatmeal, and orange juice, mother of God, you just ate 3 days worth of sugar at breakfast. I sit there on an airplane, like I'm the worst sitting there on an airplane next to somebody who's got, huge skin tags and morbidly obese and melasma, and they're wheezing, and I'm watching them have, their second orange juice on the airplane while they're eating their Nature's Gate granola bar, thinking they're doing their healthy, low carb, low fat, low calorie diet. And I'm like, you're gonna explode next to me. And so that's the place, we don't even know how far off the track we've gotten. So in 1908, we ate an average of 5 pounds of sugar per year per person, man, woman, and child. That included your grains, your fruits, your honey that you had to go out and get stung to death over to get out of the hives. Any guesses of today? The most recent statistics in 2014? 175 pounds per person. This is the bell-shaped curve, people. It means there are people eating a lot more than 175 pounds of sugar a year per person. So, duh. I mean, right there, it's like, I don't understand. And then when people still deny the impact of sugar on our diet, what the heck do you say to the PET scan? Just saying. We're like, don't, and I love how they'll tell my patient, don't eat carbs for a few days. Patients don't even know what carbs are. So they're like, well, all I had was some squash and a banana. I'm like, that's okay. We have to retrain our brains for this. But just to give you history, when people talk about this as a fad, it was the most utilized and effective treatment, and still is today, for childhood epilepsy. And that lost favor when Depakote came on the market in the 1940s. And again, something else that got suppressed. But thankfully, Charlie's Foundation, which was a father who got desperate because none of the drugs were helping his son, he pulled this dusted this off the shelf, pulled it back out, used it for his kid who was having 200 seizures a day, who stopped within a few days of eating this way. And everyone told him he was crazy like I'm so used to being told that in my life. It's become almost a compliment. And so that it's just this interesting place that now there's an entire foundation. They will literally handhold you through the process. There are people out there who are so passionate about this and what it's done for them or their loved ones that you will have people who are just gushing to share this knowledge with you. I have a pile of resources here for you. So Miriam Kalamian was a woman whose son had a brain tumor. They gave him 2 months to live. He lived for 8 years. Her story is incredible. We just interviewed her recently. Ellen Davis, one of the best sites out there for ketogenicdietresource.com. Patricia Daly just has a new book. This is a woman who also cured herself of a brain cancer out of Ireland. She's being ripped to shreds, by the way, by her local RD nutritionists and all of her government in Ireland and the UK. So please support this woman in her endeavors. Maria Emmerich. These are some of the famous names and research of the ketogenic diet. D'Agostino, Seyfried, Fenny, Adrian Shank. Adrian Shank is one of the most well-known at Barrows Neurologic in Arizona. Unbelievable the work she's doing with glioblastomas, ketogenic diet and hyperbaric oxygen. A lot of these doctors are doing that. They're seeing some amazing things where, if you know a glioblastoma person, it's hard because you're usually saying your goodbyes. Western medicine's even saying their goodbyes. And when you have folks like this, including the father of the woman that I'm currently writing a book with right now, who's going through this process, who's outlived his expiration date by over 2 years at this point with a ketogenic diet, and Harvard is his doctor saying, well, nothing we did helped, so keep doing on type of thing. We are making dents, we're making changes. And just this was just recently, in mid-May, the New York Times kind of brought out that, did anybody read that article in the New York Times about basically Warburg effect? So if you didn't go onto this link, it's great. It's starting to get mainstream. I'm not gonna spend much time with hyperthermia because you guys are gonna have the distinct pleasure of meeting the, you think I'm robust and talk fast? Wait till you meet Oscar. Dr. Oscar Streeter is going to come here and talk to you all about hyperthermia in October. But I'm going to give you kind of my take, because he's a radiation oncologist, right? So we've got to balance it out here a little bit. But we don't know for sure if it was Hippocrates or Parmenides, but basically it said, give me a fever and I'll cure any disease. What have we been doing since the 1970s with fever? My God! And what do we suppress it with? And usually acetaminophen is what we usually use. And what do we know of acetaminophen with regards to the mitochondria? It's one of the worst mitochondrial poisons out there. So we're like, oh kid, here's your cool immune system, let's squash it and then let's pour gasoline on it and set it on fire. So that's what we've been doing to my generation and up. Like basically if you were born in the 1970s, you've been suppressing a fever. You're like, oh, he's got a 98.4 fever. Or 98.9 fever. We got to suppress that. I actually will tell you this. My red flag with a new patient intake is if I say, how often do you get a good fever? And people are like, I've never had a good fever. That's a red flag for me. I'm like, well, gonna have to work on that. And so we might use, that's where mistletoe is really powerful. Even your basic far infrared saunas or a good sweat, just a good workout. But when people tell me they don't sweat, that's even a bigger red flag. We're like, that's what happened here. Something got broken along the way. So just to let you guys know, again, when people talk about hyperthermia in this country, like, there's just no evidence. Well, there is. We've been using it again since 2600 BC in Egypt, 2000 BC in Greece, 1700s in Germany, late 1800s in Germany. Coley's toxin, also a lot of articles about this lately. Good old Dr. Coley in 1890s at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Okay, in fact, they have the Coley's Award they give out every year. So even the doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering don't recognize their own history, the lineage they've come from. And then Dr. William Mayo, interesting, 1913, okay? And Coley's toxins are still used, even to this day, it was used regularly until 1960s, even at Memorial Sloan Kettering. A lot of clinics still in Germany and Mexico will still use it. We've got a few kind of underground folks in this country using it, but they're far and few between, and I'm not quite sure of if they've got the right stuff or not, but working on it. But basically, we're kind of moving into the new generation of this. And so I think this was the article in Scientific America, oh gosh, maybe a year and a half ago. it talks about cholecystoxin and goes into its history and all the move we're doing into immunomodulation therapies. So it's pretty cool to see that we are resurrecting, because they're kind of like, well, everything else we have is broken. Let's just go back to the drawing board. Let's go see what we've got hidden in the closet there. And so this concept of what does fever do in the body? What does hyperthermia do? So just a little breakdown. There's a couple different kinds. There's local, regional. There's where you can actually poke a stick, a little probe, into a tumor directly. There's whole body hyperthermia. There's even now perfusion hyperthermia. I've done a lot of work with this research group. But basically, all have a little bit different focus, a little bit different application. So to keep it simple, if it's basically under 39 degrees Celsius, you're getting an immunomodulation effect, which is awesome, right? Because most of us have broken down immune systems. If you're looking for a cytotoxic effect, which is we can do that, you got to get it above 42 degrees Celsius. You cannot be conscious when you do that very easily. So I got to go and spend a week in Dr. Herzog's hospital in Germany to see what he does, where he puts people under sedation. They've got a probe literally in every orifice you can imagine, and they're heated slowly up to 42 degrees, and they've got tons of IV nutrients and fluids coming into their body at the same time. And when they get up to that 42-degree burn, that's when he puts in low-dose chemotherapy. And that's where the magic happens. Okay? These folks, they literally pop out, and I'm like watching it like, my God, this is crazy. And they come out of it, and by the time they give them fluids and then quickly give them some IV vitamin C, as they're coming out of it, they're like, I think I'm gonna go for a hike now. And they like zip off. Of course, if they saw what I just saw their bodies go through, they would freak out probably. But it's incredible of how like little side effects they're actually dealing with. So pretty amazing stuff there. For the things that it's doing, we're seeing that it's just, again, a multi-targeted approach. That's why I keep showing you these things, because what we keep doing in Western medicine in this country is one protein, one target, one treatment. If we keep at that pace, we will get nowhere. We just won't. So if you're doing those one target approaches, start to think about bringing in some of these other concepts. At least start learning about them, because you can start to even apply the basics. Like I said, go sweat. Go for a workout, take a little bit of oral vitamin C or like whatever it is, like work with someone to help you with the basics. If you're not ready to dive into the more aggressive or assertive approaches, there are ways that you can constantly change this. Start to avoid the mitochondrial poisons in your life. It's hard to do. I've given you an entire website that tells you all the mitochondrial poisons you take. You're going to freak out about how many you take on a daily basis, just regular. Little mitochondrial damage in the morning. So this whole process here, it's so effective. So I'm going to use an example of, may I? A couple of people, of some folks who did it beautifully. The combination of a conventional approach, or where a conventional approach was sort of slacking, not working as well as it could, who brought in the application of hyperthermia, local regional hyperthermia, which is just up the road that Dr. Streeter is going to talk about in October, with fractionated low-dose radiation therapy. And so one of the amazing women in our group here had a tumor the size of a grapefruit. Wouldn't you say? Large. A big old thing on her neck, and had tried all the other kind of targeted therapies, Tarceva, you name it, because it was a particular type, a particular flavor of cancer that had a particular genetic sort of imprint that they were trying these particular one target, one treatment approaches, and it just wasn't enough. And this tumor was getting bigger, and it was getting more uncomfortable. And so she went and applied the hyperthermia with the fractionated radiation, and nada. I see nothing. And then the person behind her had a similar experience with kind of a type of cancer process that was not responding well, or was not enough to just go with a straight conventional approach. And she's sitting here to tell us about her life today as well. I've had, I don't know, dozens of patients go through this approach here at CTO and other places around the world. So just to let you know, again, it's like we are able to enhance people's even conventional therapies with these applications. So where I want to take this time this evening is I flew through those pieces. Every one of these have their own resources, places that you can go and dig a little bit deeper. But I wanted to spend so much time in the beginning helping you understand why it's important to look at these types of therapies and beyond. To me, that's the part is we don't spend time doing in our doctor's office, is getting the education of, well, why am I here to begin with and what can I do differently? So that first bit, if you can start to just understand that philosophy and that approach, you're going to go far for your own healthcare from this point forward. These therapies are fantastic adjuvants, and in some situations can be standalone therapies, right? I mean, those, you always have the outliers, right, of everything.
Can I please have a round of applause?
Oh, thank you.